Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. In the summer of 2002, two 10-year-old girls named Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman disappeared from the small town of Soham in Cambridgeshire, England. They were best friends who spent most of their time together. On the evening of 4th of August, they left Holly's home for a short walk wearing matching red Manchester United shirts. They never came back. What followed was one of the biggest police searches in British history. The case shocked the nation, filled newspapers and television screens, and left a lasting mark on the country. It was a story of friendship, loss, and the search for justice. Soham was a small town in Cambridgeshire, England. It was not a big city with tall buildings or heavy traffic. It was a quiet place with small houses, narrow streets, and friendly neighbors. People in Soham trusted each other. Parents allowed their children to walk to school without fear. Children played outside, and families lived calm lives. In 2002, two young girls lived in this town. Their names were Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Both were 10 years old, and both were students at St. Andrew's Primary School. They were classmates, and they were also best friends. Holly Wells lived with her father, Kevin, her mother, Nicola, and her brother, Oliver. Holly was cheerful, polite, and kind. She loved her family, enjoyed spending time with her friends, and was liked by her teachers. Holly was a football fan and supported Manchester United. She often wore the red shirt of the club. She also liked music and singing. She had a bright smile and was always ready to help others. Jessica Chapman lived with her father, Leslie, her mother, Sharon, and her three siblings. Jessica was full of energy and always active. She enjoyed sports and outdoor games. She was strong-minded and confident. She was also loyal to her friends and cared for them deeply. Jessica had a lively spirit, and she often made people laugh. Holly and Jessica became best friends. They liked the same things, and they spent much of their free time together. They rode bicycles, played football, and visited each other's homes. They shared secrets and dreams. Their families were glad that the girls had each other. Everyone in Soham often saw them together, laughing and enjoying themselves. On Sunday, 4th of August 2002, Holly's family decided to have a barbecue at their home. The day was warm and sunny. Relatives and friends came to join. The garden was filled with voices, food, and cheerful conversation. Holly wore her red Manchester United shirt. Jessica, who came to visit her best friend, also wore the same shirt. The two girls looked like twins in their matching clothes. The barbecue continued through the afternoon. Holly and Jessica ate food, played together, and joined in the family gathering. The girls looked happy. For them, it was just another fun day of the summer holidays. At about 6:15 p.m., Holly and Jessica told Holly's parents that they wanted to go out for a short walk. They promised to return soon. Their parents agreed because Soham was a safe town and nothing seemed dangerous. The two girls left the house together. As they walked through the neighborhood, several people saw them. Neighbors noticed the red shirts. Some waved at them. The girls looked cheerful and relaxed. They were seen talking to each other as they walked down College Close. Nobody knew that this was the last time the two friends would be seen alive. Back at the house, the barbecue continued. Guests were eating and talking. Later, the guests began to leave. Holly's parents looked around and noticed that the girls had not returned. At first, they thought the girls were still nearby, playing with friends. They waited for them to come back. But time passed and the girls did not return. Kevin and Nicola began to worry. They started making phone calls. They contacted friends, neighbors, and relatives. They asked if anyone had seen Holly and Jessica. Nobody had seen them after they left the house. The parents grew more anxious. As the evening turned into night, their worry increased. The girls had been gone for hours. It was no longer safe to wait. Kevin and Nicola contacted the police and reported the girls missing. Officers soon arrived at the Wells house. They asked questions and began to gather information. Word spread quickly in Soham. People were shocked to hear that two young girls were missing. Parents held their children close. Neighbors gathered and spoke in low voices. Everyone wondered what had happened to Holly and Jessica. Police began a search. Officers walked through the streets. Volunteers joined them. People carried flashlights. They searched gardens, garages, and sheds. They knocked on doors and asked questions. Cars drove slowly with headlights shining into corners. The names Holly and Jessica were called again and again, but no voices answered. The search continued late into the night. More people joined in. Everyone wanted to find the girls, but the streets remained silent, and no trace of Holly or Jessica was found. Soham, which had always been a peaceful town, was now filled with fear. Parents kept their children indoors. People locked their doors and windows. Neighbors who once felt safe now felt uneasy. The night ended without answers. Holly and Jessica had left the Wells home at 6:15 p.m. wearing red Manchester United shirts. They were seen walking together. After that, they disappeared. Their families waited for them to return, but they never did. What began as a normal Sunday had turned into something terrible. 2 10-year-old girls had vanished. The news of the missing girls spread quickly through Soham. By the morning of 5 August 2002, the whole town knew that Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman had disappeared. Flyers with their photographs were printed and handed out. The pictures showed 2 smiling girls in red Manchester United shirts. Neighbors placed the flyers in windows. Shopkeepers put them on doors. People pinned them on notice boards. Everyone was talking about the 2 girls. Police officers went door to door. They asked questions about when the girls were last seen. They recorded times and locations. Several people confirmed that they had seen the girls walking near College Close on Sunday evening. Some said they saw them talking. Others said they waved as the girls passed by. But after that moment, there were no more clear sightings. The search grew larger. Officers searched fields, rivers, and empty buildings. Helicopters flew overhead. Dogs were used to track scents. Hundreds of volunteers joined the effort. They walked through streets calling the girls names. They checked playgrounds, parks, and alleys. Everyone hoped the girls had simply lost their way or were hiding. But hours turned into days, and there was no sign of them. The families of Holly and Jessica were deeply worried. Kevin and Nicola Wells spoke to reporters. They held up pictures of their daughter and begged anyone with information to come forward. Leslie and Sharon Chapman did the same. They asked people not to stay silent if they knew something. The parents were exhausted but continued to face the cameras, hoping that someone would help. Television channels covered the story day and night. Newspapers printed headlines about the missing girls. Their photographs were on the front page of almost every paper. Reporters came to Soham from across the country. Vans with cameras lined the streets. Microphones were placed in front of anyone who might have information. The whole nation now knew about the disappearance. Among the people who spoke to the media was Huntley. He was the school caretaker at Soham Village College. He lived nearby in a schoolhouse with his girlfriend, Maxine Carr, who worked as a teaching assistant at St. Andrew's Primary School, where the girls studied. Huntley told reporters that he had spoken to Holly and Jessica on the evening they disappeared. He said the girls had stopped to ask about Maxine and then they walked away. His statement was broadcast widely. Maxine Carr also spoke to reporters. She described Holly and Jessica as lovely girls and said she cared for them. She had worked with children in the school and had known Holly and Jessica well. She said she hoped they would return safely. Her words were printed in the newspapers and people felt sympathy. Days passed and there were still no answers. The police set up a headquarters in Soham to coordinate the investigation. They received thousands of calls from people across the country. Some gave tips, some shared possible sightings, but none led to the girls. Officers studied CCTV footage from nearby areas. They checked vehicles that had passed through Soham on that Sunday evening. They questioned known offenders in the region. But the search continued without success. The families appeared again on television. Kevin Wells spoke calmly but with pain in his voice. He said the family just wanted Holly and Jessica back. Sharon Chapman cried as she held a picture of Jessica. The appeals touched the hearts of millions of people who were following the case. Police increased their efforts. They searched water bodies around Soham. Divers entered rivers and ponds. Nothing was found. Officers searched farmland, barns, and abandoned buildings. They questioned taxi drivers, bus drivers, and delivery workers. But Holly and Jessica remained missing. The pressure on the police grew. Reporters asked why there were no answers. The public grew restless. Everyone wanted to know what had happened to the girls. Each day felt heavier as time passed. Meanwhile, Huntley continued to appear in front of the cameras. He repeated that he had spoken to the girls before they disappeared. He seemed calm, sometimes even helpful. He said he wished he could do more to help. Many people saw him as a caring local man, but some people in Soham found his behavior strange. He often placed himself in front of the media. He gave details about the last time he saw the girls, but the details sometimes changed. His interest in the investigation seemed too strong. Rumors began to spread quietly. Maxine Carr stood by him. She defended him when people asked questions. She said he was being helpful and that he cared for the girls. She said she herself wished she could do something to bring the girls home. The investigation grew larger every day. Hundreds of officers worked on the case. They studied every piece of information. They checked every possible lead. But still there were no signs of the missing children. The families of Holly and Jessica continued to suffer. They sat in their homes, surrounded by reporters. They faced cameras again and again, asking for their daughters to be returned. Their faces showed the weight of sleepless nights. Yet they remained strong because they believed someone, somewhere, knew the truth. As the first week ended, Soham was no longer a quiet town. It was a place filled with police cars, flashing lights, reporters, and cameras. The disappearance of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman was now the focus of the entire country. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone hoped the girls would be found alive, but the mystery only deepened with each passing day. The investigation continued into the second week. Police officers kept searching every corner of Soham and the areas around it. They checked rivers, lakes, and fields. They knocked on hundreds of doors. They spoke to drivers, workers, and strangers who had passed through the town. But no trace of Holly Wells or Jessica Chapman was found. Reporters stayed in Soham day and night. Television vans lined the streets. Cameras followed every movement. The families of the girls gave more appeals. Kevin and Nicola Wells asked people not to forget their daughter. Leslie and Sharon Chapman begged anyone with information to speak up. The families were tired, but they never stopped asking for help. Ian Huntley continued to appear in front of the cameras. He repeated his story that he had spoken to the girls on the evening they disappeared. He said they had asked about Maxine, and then they walked away. Sometimes his words changed slightly. Sometimes he seemed nervous. But still he stood in front of the microphones, giving interviews. Maxine Carr also continued to defend him. She told reporters that Holly and Jessica were sweet and kind. She said she had looked after them at school. She said she wanted them to return safely. She always spoke in support of Ian, telling people he was innocent and helpful. Behind the scenes, police began to pay more attention to Huntley. His behavior seemed unusual. He was very involved in the case. He gave too much detail. He liked to be near the reporters. Investigators started to look into his past. They found worrying things. Huntley had changed jobs many times. He had moved from place to place. There were reports about him from earlier years. None of these reports had led to convictions, but they showed a troubling history. The police became suspicious. Officers searched his home, which was on the grounds of Soham Village College. They looked for signs of the girls. At first, they found nothing clear, but questions about him continued to grow. Reporters started to ask why he was always in front of the cameras. Some local people whispered about him. His calm face no longer convinced everyone. The police decided to question him more closely. They brought him in for interviews. He repeated the same story. He said he had spoken to the girls and then watched them walk away. He denied knowing anything more. Maxine Carr supported his words. She said she was with him. She gave him an alibi. She told police that on the day the girls disappeared, she had been at home with Ian. She said he could not have done anything wrong, but her story did not fit with all the facts. Officers checked her movements and found she had not been in Soham that weekend. She had been in Grimsby visiting family. Her words were false. As the days passed, the pressure increased. Officers searched the area again and again. Then, on 17th August 2002, almost 2 weeks after the disappearance, 2 bodies were discovered in a ditch near RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk. They were found by a local man walking his dog. The site was about 12 miles from Soham. The remains were badly damaged, but soon police confirmed the worst. The bodies were those of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. The news spread quickly. Reporters announced it live on television. Newspapers printed headlines in bold letters. The families were informed. The town of Soham was in shock. The whole country grieved. Attention turned at once to Ian Huntley. He had been the last person to admit speaking to the girls. He had placed himself in the center of the story. Now suspicion was heavy on him. On 17th of August, police arrested Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr. They were taken to separate police stations. Huntley was charged with the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Carr was charged with assisting him by giving false information. The arrests were broadcast across the nation. Crowds gathered outside the police station. People shouted in anger. Reporters filmed every moment. Investigators began to build the case. They searched Huntley's house again in detail. They studied his car, his clothing, and his belongings. They collected forensic evidence. They checked carpets, floors, and drains. Slowly, a picture began to form. It became clear that Holly and Jessica had entered Huntley's house on the evening of 4th August. What happened inside ended their young lives. Huntley had lied when he said he only spoke to them at the door. His story was false from the beginning. Maxine Carr's role was also clear. She had not been present in Soham that night, but she had lied to protect Huntley. She gave him an alibi he did not have. She told police that he was innocent when she knew she was not speaking the truth. The discovery of the bodies ended hope, but gave answers. The mystery of the disappearance was solved, but the truth was dark and painful. The families now faced the reality that their daughters would not return. The town of Soham faced the fact that one of their own residents, the school caretaker, had committed a terrible crime. The investigation now turned to preparing for trial. The nation watched as the details unfolded. What had started as the case of two missing girls was now a case of murder. The story of Soham was no longer only about hope. It was about justice. After the arrests of Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr, the investigation entered a new stage. Police officers worked day and night to collect evidence. Forensic teams searched Huntley's house again and again. They checked every room, every carpet, every drain, and every corner. They looked for any sign of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. They also studied Huntley's car and clothing. Pieces of evidence began to appear. Fibers from the girls' Manchester United shirts were found inside Huntley's house and in his car. There were signs that the girls had been in the bathroom. There were also signs of attempts to clean and remove evidence. The forensic teams recorded everything carefully. Meanwhile, Maxine Carr was questioned. She admitted that she had not been in Soham on the day the girls disappeared. She had been in Grimsby visiting her family. Her earlier story was false. She had lied to give Huntley an alibi. She said she lied because she loved him and wanted to protect him. Huntley himself gave several different versions of what happened. At first, he denied any involvement. Later, he said that Holly and Jessica had entered his house and that one of them had an accident in the bathroom. He claimed he panicked when she died and that the other girl also died while trying to help. His stories changed, but he never gave a clear or believable explanation. The public reaction was strong. People across the country were angry. They felt horror that the school caretaker, who was supposed to be a trusted person, had committed such a crime. They were also angry at Maxine Carr for lying to protect him. The faces of Holly and Jessica were everywhere. Their pictures were shown on television, in newspapers, and on posters. The families of the girls were surrounded by sympathy and support, but their pain was deep. In 2003, the case went to trial at the Old Bailey in London. The trial became one of the most watched in the history of the country. Reporters filled the courtroom. Television crews waited outside. The families of Holly and Jessica sat through the painful details. The prosecution explained the case step by step. They showed how Huntley had lured the girls into his house. They described the evidence of fibers, fingerprints, and forensic tests. They explained the lies he told to police and to the public. They showed how Carr had lied to protect him. The defense tried to argue that the deaths were accidents. Huntley's lawyers repeated his claim that one girl had drowned in the bath and the other had died while trying to help. But the evidence did not support this story. The prosecution said clearly that both deaths were the result of murder, not accidents. Witnesses came forward. Experts described the forensic tests. Police officers explained the searches and the discoveries. Reporters wrote every detail in the newspapers. The families listened quietly, holding each other for strength. Huntley sat in the dock. Sometimes he looked down. Sometimes he looked straight ahead. He showed little emotion. Carr sat separately. She cried during some parts of the trial. She said she wished she had never lied for him. The trial lasted for weeks. The judge listened carefully to both sides. The jury was shown photographs, evidence, and reports. They were asked to decide if Huntley was guilty of murder and if Carr was guilty of helping him. Finally, in December 2003, the jury gave its decision. Ian Huntley was found guilty of the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge said he must serve a minimum of 40 years before he could even be considered for release. Effectively, it meant he would spend most, if not all, of his life in prison. Maxine Carr was found guilty of perverting the course of justice. She was not found guilty of helping in the murders, but she was guilty of lying to protect Huntley. She was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. She served part of that time before being released under a new identity. When the verdicts were read, the families of Holly and Jessica cried quietly. They had waited many months for justice. They had lost their daughters, but at least the man responsible would spend his life in prison. The public felt relief that justice had been served, but the sadness remained. The story of the Soham murders became one of the most shocking cases in modern British history. It showed how 2 innocent children could be taken from their families in a moment. It showed how a man who seemed ordinary could hide such darkness. It also showed how lies could make a terrible crime even worse. The trial ended, but the pain for the families never ended. Kevin and Nicola Wells and Leslie and Sharon Chapman returned home without their daughters. Their lives were changed forever. They continued to speak about Holly and Jessica, keeping their memory alive. The town of Soham also tried to heal, but the memory of August 2002 would never be forgotten. After the trial ended and Ian Huntley was sent to prison, the families of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman returned to their lives. But nothing was the same. The girls were gone, and the pain of their loss stayed with the families every day. The parents tried to stay strong, but the empty bedrooms in their homes reminded them of what they had lost. The people of Soham also tried to move forward. The small town had become known all over the world for the tragedy. Reporters had filled its streets, cameras had filmed every corner, and the name Soham had become connected to the murders. When the reporters finally left, the people of the town were left to live with the memory. Shops reopened as normal, schools continued, and families went back to work. But the sadness stayed in the hearts of many. Across the country, people continued to talk about the case. The faces of Holly and Jessica were remembered. Their photographs had been seen by millions, and nobody forgot the 2 smiling girls in their red football shirts. The nation grieved for them, and their story was told again and again. The government also took action after the case. Questions were asked about how Ian Huntley had been able to work in a school despite his troubling past. Investigations showed that there had been warnings about him in earlier years, but they had not been shared properly between police forces and employers. Because of this failure, he had been able to get a job as a school caretaker in Soham. As a result, the government introduced stronger background checks for people working with children. The system was called the Criminal Records Bureau Check, which later became the Disclosure and Barring Service. This system made it much harder for people with dangerous pasts to hide their history. The Soham case directly led to this important change, and many people believed it helped protect other children in the future. Maxine Carr served part of her sentence in prison. When she was released, she was given a new identity because there was anger against her across the country. Many people could not forgive her for lying to protect Huntley. She said later that she regretted her actions, but the public never trusted her again. Ian Huntley remained in prison. He was moved between different jails for safety reasons, because other prisoners saw him as one of the most hated men in the country. He was attacked several times by other inmates. He became a symbol of evil in the public eye. Newspapers wrote about his life in prison, but the families of Holly and Jessica asked not to give him attention. For them, it was better to focus on the memory of the girls rather than the man who had taken their lives. Memorials were created for Holly and Jessica. In Soham, flowers and messages filled the streets for months after their disappearance. Later, more permanent memorials were built to honor them. People visited these places to leave flowers, toys, and cards. The town wanted to remember the girls with love, not only with sadness. Each year, on the anniversary of their disappearance, people paused to think about them. The families often gave statements, thanking the public for support. The nation continued to share their story. Books were written about the case, documentaries were made, and their story became part of the history of the country. For the parents, life was divided into two parts, before August 2002 and after August 2002. Before, their homes were full of laughter and ordinary family life. After, there was grief and silence. They learned to live with the loss, but it never disappeared. Kevin Wells later wrote a book about his daughter Holly, sharing the family's experience and pain. It was his way of keeping her memory alive. The Soham case also changed the way the media worked. Reporters had covered every detail of the disappearance, the search, and the trial. Some people felt the coverage was too much, almost invading the privacy of the families. Later, rules about how the media covered such cases were discussed. But at the same time, the media had also helped spread the message quickly and had kept the story alive in the public mind, which pressured the police to act faster. Even many years later, people in Britain still remembered where they were when they first heard about the missing girls. The case had touched almost everyone. It was not just a crime in a small town. It was seen as a national tragedy. Two 10-year-old girls had gone out for a walk on a summer evening and had never come home. That simple fact stayed in the hearts of millions. The story of Soham became a reminder about the importance of protecting children. Schools, communities, and families became more cautious. People no longer assumed that small towns were always safe. The idea of danger existing anywhere became clear. Parents across the country hugged their children more tightly and reminded them to be careful. For the children of Soham, growing up after the tragedy was difficult. Many of them had been classmates or friends of Holly and Jessica. They had seen the posters, the reporters, and the police. They had felt the fear in their town. As they grew older, they carried those memories with them. Some spoke later about how the events had shaped their view of safety and trust. The Soham murders will always be remembered as one of the darkest crimes in Britain. But Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman are remembered not for the crime, but for the joy and brightness they brought to their families and friends. They were best friends who shared laughter, secrets, and dreams. Their lives were cut short, but their memory continues. The case left behind sadness, anger, and lessons. It led to stronger laws, better protection for children, and greater awareness. It also showed the strength of families who suffered the worst loss, yet still stood with dignity. Years passed, but the names Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman remained in people's minds. Their story was told in homes, in schools, and in books. It was a story of two ordinary girls who became symbols of innocence and loss. It was also a story that reminded everyone of the need for vigilance, justice, and care. In the end, the Soham case was not only about a crime. It was about two families, a community, and a nation that came together in grief. It was about two children whose lives ended too soon, but whose memory continues to live on. The Soham case ended with justice in the courtroom, but the pain of the loss never ended for the families. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman were remembered not only as victims of a terrible crime, but as two bright, cheerful girls who brought joy to everyone around them. Their photographs in red football shirts became symbols of innocence taken too soon. The tragedy changed the nation. Stronger checks were introduced to protect children, and people became more careful and alert. The names of Holly and Jessica continued to be spoken, and their memory lived on in their families in Soham and across the country. It was a story of sorrow, but also a reminder of the importance of love, safety, and justice. Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends.